Thumbelina. Originally a bedtime story written by the Danish author Hans Christian Andersen, famous for the works like The Snow Queen, Little Mermaid, and The Ugly Duckling. In 1835, he wrote Thumbelina, a story of a tiny girl who has adventures with many field and forest critters until she meets and marries a fairy prince who's just her size. However, our reboot is going to be a reboot of a modern reboot of that story. In the February of 1991, Don Bluth made the great mistake of beginning production of Thumbelina, featuring himself as director, producer, and writer, and becoming my worst enemy. Bluth is a white American man who has plagued my studies for the last 12 weeks. Unintentionally, might I add. Anyway, the movie was made and released when Bluth was an ex-Disney employee at the relative peak of his career. This didn't help Thumbelina though, as it was a perpetual box office flop with most critics. Compared to the Disney Renaissance that was happening at the same time, Bluth's interpretation of Thumbelina was pitiful. She had no real personality and was passed on from pimp to pimp to pimp with proposals of marriage until she finally said no during a wedding, her wedding, to then go off and marry a fairy prince because love at first sight exists, apparently. And then she gets wings after, 1, not wishing for them, 2, marrying the prince gets her wings, and 3, how do we know she's actually a fairy? We know this happens in the original story. However, I've always had this issue with the original story. Why does she get wings? What reason does she need them? Not in Bluth's adaptation, but in the Christian Andersen original story. She is so resourceful and able to adapt not having wings, and then she just gets them in the end. It's kind of pathetic. But yeah, compared to The Lion King, that came out the same year, 1994, The Nightmare Before Christmas, the year before, and Aladdin 2 years prior, as well as The Little Mermaid, which all women have more than 3 thoughts the whole movie, and even speeches about not being damsels or a prize to be won, Thumbelina falls a tad bit short in the feminism department. Now, despite my previous rant, why does it actually need to be rebooted? Why is it problematic? I think I've already told you. However, let's break it down character by character. Thumbelina, our title character, who doesn't develop all too much over the movie. She is pessimistic, often crying about her situation rather than doing anything. She passively exists in her own narrative. Her only desire, she wants to get home and marry the fairy prince, who she had known for one song. However, she is not heading in any specific direction to get home, and is very easily manipulated. Her character, in my opinion, is easy to hate and hard to love, as her story relevance is that she is too pretty and too good at singing. A plot point added because she was voiced by Jodie Benson, who is the voice actor for Ariel, and allegedly Thumbelina was written and based after Jodie. Allegedly. And so she is targeted by everyone and everything for her beauty and her singing. She also cries about being called ugly and takes it so to heart that it's embarrassing. She is generally spineless and pessimistic, where she only takes action in the final climax of the film when she's running away from the wedding. Then she starts crying afterwards, mind you, saying it's useless for me to be out here, until she's convinced to start singing, and oh look, the fairies came because you started singing. You actually did something and got your outcome, instead of sitting there weeping. I also have a big issue with the fact that she just gets wings. But we'll delve into that later. Prince Cornelius. He is the rebellious prince who spends most of the movie searching for Thumbelina, as he had fallen head over heels in love with her during one song. That is the only meeting they had. It's kind of creepy, to be honest. Cornelius is very creepy. His design's very strange. I don't like his face. Anyway, can't say I paid too much attention to him other than feeling scared, as his existence feels only to give Thumbelina a 20th century heteronormative ending of a royal wedding, alike Cinderella, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, etc. He's very flat, and if not loved by Thumbelina, would be in the same field of the toad and beetle in his obsession with her. That's a problem I have with most of the main characters or the heroes of the story. All of them are very flat and have no depth to their personality. And the only way you can really tell they're heroes is because they're not the villains. They're not creepy. Miss Dolores Toad. Good old racism. Mrs. Dolores Toad and her sons are all supposedly Spanish, making them the only OC characters in the film, which doesn't sit well when they are both villains and problematic characters. Mrs. Toad is highly over-sexualized, which is an unfounded stereotype put onto Latin women. And her family is also misogynistic criminals, another stereotype put onto Hispanic people. It's very hodgepodge together and not consistent. Like, they have a lot of stereotypes from Spain, Colombia, Mexican, none of them founded, mind you. They're all racist stereotypes. Blanket statement: I am not an expert. I am white. I'm a white person who has not faced, lived with, or deconstructed racism. So I am not an expert, not claiming to be, and I think I talk about this later. But if I were to produce this film, I would 100% hire people more qualified than me. Jacquimo. I'm not the biggest fan of him, as you can tell. A French bird who serves as the narrator of the movie, as well as in the original story. Jacquimo is meant to be likable. He's meant to be a bumbling French bird who is comic relief, but he is there to help Thumbelina and Cornelius find each other in the end, like a guardian angel. However, I have a bone to pick with this bird. He doesn't listen, doesn't think, doesn't even pay attention to the general destruction and nuisance he is causing. Like, sorry, he nearly kills Thumbelina when they first meet. He nearly drowns her and throws her off a waterfall. Excuse me? We're meant to like this man? But she just fully trusts him. If he uses his brain and flew her back to her home upon first meeting, the whole movie would be over. He also pulls a Disney death in The Hole, where he dies and comes back to life. But you'll never guess what I did to Jacquimo in my reboot. Grundle. Grundle is one of Dolores's 3 sons, and he is the eldest and the one that is to be married to Thumbelina. His stereotype is a misogynistic criminal, as well as he speaks in broken English throughout the entire film, and he is mocked because of it. He is mocked by Berkeley Beetle, by Thumbelina herself, by Cornelius, I believe, Jacquimo, his brothers. He's just mocked by his brothers though because he got rejected by a girl, and that's what made him sad. He also gets no real punishment. You find him at the end of the film, he's there with a female toad at the wedding. Like, yeah, he gets crushed, but other than that, he has no real punishment for being persistent. Berkeley Beetle! Icky, icky bug. Icky bug man. Icky, icky, icky. He's a pimp. He works in a cabaret. He's a pimp. He calls Thumbelina all gross names, specifically toots. He uses toots too much. Doesn't, respect her when she says, "I'm not your toots. Stop calling me that." Kidnaps Thumbelina to perform in a cabaret where she loses her clothes and gets called ugly because she's not a beetle. And then he flies away and he's like, not my problem. He kills the prince. He doesn't really. He just finds him in the ice and just is like, yep, I've killed him. He's out of the way now. And helps Grundle try to kidnap Thumbelina. Mr. Mole! He's a blind mole who wants to marry Thumbelina because she sounds nice. Very creepy, very unsettling as a character and in just general design and movement. He's obviously not meant to be attractive. Miss Fieldmouse. She's very manipulative. She's the one who pimps out Thumbelina to Mr. Mole for the wedding. She's not shy about it. It's like, I'm being manipulative, but you can clearly tell Thumbelina if you had any sort of brain about it. Anyway, her song was a bop. I want a reboot of Marry Them All. I want it now. Mama. Overall, quite useless. Doesn't do much. She sobs. She's like, Thumbelina, please come home. Thumbelina doesn't really have a reunion with her mother, who suspects she's dead for half the film, mind you, because the frost is coming on and Thumbelina can't survive that. She gets a reunion with a man she just met, and not her mother, who has raised her for the past 16 weeks. Thumbelina is also not that old. Overall, the story is very, this happens, this happens, this happens, and pushes Thumbelina with it. As I said before, there is only heroes and villains, and no morally questionable characters or in-depth characters that make the story interesting and textured. There's no depth to the film, which goes hand in hand with the earlier films and animation and its writing, as they were very hard to make, so it was harder to make in-depth characters. But now, in our modern times, people prefer in-depth characters. The movie is wedding central and man wanting woman despite woman saying no central. Also, Thumb is just being pulled along. She has no thoughts, head empty, thrown about, and it's still a very odd conclusion with Thumb getting wings, considering... Anyway, what am I gonna do? What is my reboot gonna do? Well, firstly, Cornelius, revoked. Cornelius is not a part of the reboot. Because why have a story about a thumb-sized woman not fitting in and wanting to find her people involve a love story? Why does he need to be there? Why not tell a story about a thumb-sized woman wanting to find her people in a world and be determined to go out there and get it? Abilities be damned. So, a man in a heteronormative storyline will not be the center of our attention today. However, there will be heteronormative aspects, as, you know, it's very hard to write out the whole pimp desire thing that's going on. I'm using the word pimp a lot. I should probably stop. Our center of the movie, our actual center, rather than a man, is Thumbelina's dream to see the world and meet people like herself. Her mama told her all these stories about a world where people are just her size, the fairies, so why wouldn't she be determined to see it? But mama is scared to let her go outside. Thumbelina can't fly like the fairies can, so who knows if she'll survive in the world. After all, mama lives on the outskirts of town in her wheelchair because she isn't useful for the working forces and she can't walk. I want the overarching message of this film to be the enabling of disabled people, where Thumbelina is a fairy-esque creature without wings, but she is capable of maneuvering through the world, regardless of her no wings and small size. Days before the end of autumn, Thumbelina looks outside her window, as she does every night, and has her I Want song. The original movie was a musical, both because it was written by an ex-Disney worker and competing with the Disney musical movies, also because Thumbelina was voiced by Benson, and so her attractiveness of Thumbelina was also her singing capabilities. However, I'm a sucker for musicals, and so the reboot is keeping its charm with better songs. More on that later. The song serves both to encompass her desire and find people in a world made for her, as well as display to the audience her singing capabilities that she's praised for later in the film. As she sings this, she spies the fairies with their goodbye autumn parade, bring on the winter thing that they have in the original film, and she throws herself at the chance of meeting them, running after them and shouting. However, because of her winglessness, she isn't heard and she can't keep up with them, and falls down a ditch into the long grass near the stream. Realizing her mistake, she tries to see where her home is, but she can't, only knowing the direction the fairies are going in. So she goes, "Screw this, I'm out here already, so I'm going to keep going," and follows the water in the direction of the fairies. This is where our story begins. Hearing Thumb sing her I Will song, a final verse and chorus of, or a reprise of the I Want song, the performance boat of the Familia de Sapo, or Toad family, floats down the stream, and Mama Dolores calls for Thumbelina, calling her voice beautiful and applauding her performance, but tells Thumbelina that she should make people pay for that, because Dolores is nothing but a girl's girl. Thumbelina is humble about this, in her nicety and gentleness of a character, and asks if they're heading downstream. Mama Dolores says yes, and agrees that if Thumbelina performs with them for every performance she's on the boat for, then they'll take her down the river. Thumbelina agrees, and off they go. So having Thumbelina ask for help from Dolores instead of the original kidnapping scheme, then first removes the criminal aspects of the Toads and racist stereotype, but two, makes Dolores a girl's girl performer who wants nothing but the best for Thumbelina and other people with talent. This then taints Dolores's bolder personality without the boldness being her sexualized figure. On the boat, we get a good old montage song, or just a general performance song, with the Toads performing, where instead of the whole thing being Dolores stereotyped into sexualizing and telling Thumbelina to marry her son, we get everyone singing, then Grundle making sly comments about Thumbelina being different because she doesn't dance like them / doesn't have frog legs. This rewrite of the Toads is to fit the narrative that I'm writing. However, as stated before, I'm no expert on deconstructing or rewriting racist characters, and would hire someone of that race or those experiences to be either a consultant or themselves a writer and producer in order to portray a non-racist character. I don't believe that writing out the race and Spanish portrayal is a good idea, as Dolores was, allegedly, written around Charo, who is an American Spanish singer and the voice actor of Dolores, just like Thumbelina was, allegedly, written around Jodie Benson. To remove the race entirely from the Toads would, I feel, be backtracking and backpedaling into the entire cast being white, which is not a good idea. That's colonialism. There is no actual race or ethnicity put for any of the other characters, besides, like, Jacquemot, because I keep calling him the French bird, but his name is Jacquemot, so what else am I gonna do? But revoking the race entirely is a bad idea, because that would portray it as a white-centric movie, which is not nice and not inclusive and intersectional as our current world is. So you would want more diversity in the movie, which would just be not forced. It would be something akin to She-Ra, having diverse POC characters without the need to mention it, point it out, make them so different. It's just, they're there. They're different. Not everyone's white. Whoa. Holy shit. No. Not everyone's white, nor does everyone have to be. So I think keeping the toads as Hispanic or Spanish heritage is great old fun, because that then gives you the opportunity to write songs like the one in the original, just make them less sexist and racist. So, back to the story. Thumbelina gets mad about being dug out by Grundle, where he now turns to her and is like I didn't do that, guy. So Thumbelina absolutely flips at him during a performance and jumps off the boat, swimming away. Grundle is embarrassed and lambasted by his mother, who is very upset that she has now lost one of her performers, and just upset that her son would upset Thumbelina. Everyone's upset. Thumbelina crawls onto a lily pad to catch her breath, but now she is unsure of where she is, and there's a large split in the stream that she had not remembered before, so she doesn't know where to go. Enter Giacomo. Now, I am aware of my bias, and I'm also aware I'm pulling a James Gunn versus Scrappy-Doo situation. If you don't know what that is, please watch this video. But I've hated Giacomo ever since I was a child, so he's dying. Sorry, not sorry, I'm killing him off. Giacomo finds Thumb, and as the bumbling oaf he is, he sends Thumbelina down the fork in the stream towards the waterfall after she just asks him to fly up and tell her where the tree is. Luckily, also, I realised I didn't mention this, the tree is Pixie Hollow, essentially. It's where the fairies live. So it's no longer the Vale of Fairies, it's just this giant tree on a hill that she's trying to get to. So luckily, the MVP characters of the fish and jitterbugs are here to respond to Thumbelina's cries of need as she lassos a dragonfly with her string belt, like she does in this illustration of the Christian Andersen story. She asks the jitterbugs and dragonflies where the fairy tree is, ignoring Giacomo's spluttering in the background. The bugs point her over the reeds and up the hill, as she had already passed the tree. She says thank you, and trudges through the grasses. Cut to the fairies preparing to bring the winter frost, giving the audience a timestamp and Thumbelina a countdown. Grundle, after being laughed at by his brothers for being suspended from the shows by Dolores, decides he wants to take this out on Thumbelina. So he leaves for the tree. Cut back to Thumbelina. She is singing a song while walking through the leaves, what are they called? Grass! Perhaps with an ensemble of jitterbugs pointing her in the right direction as she goes towards the trees. All to a musical song, obviously. This song is more or less an ensemble song about being determined to do what you can do, but not be afraid to ask for help. It's to show that Thumbelina, while being resourceful and can be independent on her own, is not afraid to ask for help when she needs it. The song ends with Thumbelina running into Berkeley Beetle, who immediately starts his toots stuff, and gets turned down strictly, yet politely, by Thumbelina, who has no interest whatsoever on the side quest that he has approached for her. He backs off, then begins the waterworks, playing into Thumbelina's sympathy to draw her physically closer to him, and so she comes closer to comfort him. And then he snatches her and flies her to the cabaret like he does in the original movie. So up in the cabaret tree, she gets pushed and shoved and put on stage with a glitzy outfit. Thumbelina plays along, just to be able to sneak out at the end of the song. Or she sings along to the villain ensemble song, which is a warped version of the other ensemble song. Everyone is singing about being worthy because of what you can do, and being seen as less if you're not what's expected. So people are mocked during the performance, whatnot. And it ends in the Beetle Cabaret mocking Thumbelina's inability to fly, and not having shiny scales, etc., not looking like a beetle, basically. So the song concludes with the Beatles having the sentiment, "You can't fly, so why keep you around?" And they all fly off, leaving Thumbelina to cry and sit on the knot of a tree. In the OG, they sing about how ugly Thumbelina is. And because she has never heard this before, always being told that she's rather desirable, she sobs relentlessly about it. And I would much rather not solidify beauty as a necessary and desired trait in a person when marketing to kids, Bluth. I'm calling you out. This is creepy. This is weird. She's 16. Why is she a sex symbol if she's 16? Like, she's not a sex symbol, but she is a symbol of beauty and thrown into so many weddings. She's 16! She's 6! Grundle runs into the crowd of beetles as they're flying away, all smack-talking Thumbelina, catching Grundle's ears? Catching Grundle's parotoid gland. And he grabs Berkeley, shaking him to answer about Thumbelina. They convene, able to work together to find her and head toward the fairy tree, because neither of them really like her. Back on the knot of the tree, Giacomo spies Thumbelina sobbing and asks her why she feels it necessary to cry over what she can't do, while not appreciating what she can. She feels extra determined, but Giacomo suggests that Thumbelina actually sleep and eat some nuts that he's been carrying, so she has energy to get to the fairy tree and not freeze to death, as it is now, like, night. While she sleeps, Giacomo goes to find the fairies to tell them that Thumbelina is coming and that they shouldn't fortify the tree for winter just yet. But tragically, he gets struck out of the sky by a beetle and a toad and falls into the bramble bush. The thorns get stuck in his wings and he falls into a hole of a burrow. Dun dun dun! We then get an establishing shot of the frost covering the grass, trees, and stream, as well as the garden at Mama's. Then we get an actual shot of Mama. She can't leave the house, as the slick ice has made it very difficult to use her wheelchair, so she can't sit outside and wait for Thumbelina like she had been doing prior. We're actually showing her as sympathetic, because in the original movie, I had quite a problem with the fact that she was a mobile woman, she was able to move, able to go places, but she wasn't out searching for her child that she allegedly cares about. Back to Thumbelina, where she is visibly weakened by the cold, so much that when she falls into the stream, right at the base of the hill that the tree's on top of, she can barely crawl out. Cut to black. Dun dun dun. She's not dead, she's just really cold. We get a shot of black where we hear a gentle voice. Thumbelina wakes up to the voice of Miss Fieldmouse, my darling. Thumbelina is in Mrs. Field's home, where Thumbelina reads Fieldmouse as a loving, caring, and maybe a bit crazy of a woman. She is far more gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, rather than manipulate, mansplain, male wife, like initially written. She's far more subtle in her advances, and plays into an in-depth character where you can tell that she does care, but she's obviously putting herself first over Thumbelina and her desires. Thumbelina is told that she was knocked out for months, not true, and that the fairies have already sealed the tree. Again, not true. She is distraught, and then Fieldmouse comforts her in a sly way, and then tells her we should go see Mr. Mole. From the chimney, Berkeley is listening in and leaves to tell Grundle. So off to Mr. Mole, where Thumbelina is asked to sing, being known for her beautiful singing voice, and Mr. Mole being blind is like, yeah, I want to hear that. So she sings a I'm Giving Up song, which appeases Mr. Mole's masochist and sadist desires. Like this good old dead thing he takes Thumbelina and Mrs. Fieldmouse go see. Surprise! The dead thing is Giacomo. Note in these shots there is a Chekhov's gun of a needle and button in the foreground of the burrow. Mr. Mole talks about his wants for a wife with Fieldmouse, where Fieldmouse is notably getting excited. He obviously says he wants to marry Thumbelina because she can sing about depressing stuff. So Fieldmouse is sad and disheartened because obviously she's written to be more in love with Mr. Mole, which was an underlying thing in the movie, but you couldn't really tell. Was she in love with him? Was she not? We don't know. Fieldmouse is sad, but then gets a monetary incentive, so she's not really complaining. Then Thumb and Field go back to Field's home. Berkeley tells Grundle about Thumbelina being bound to the Fieldmouse's house. Grundle's like, well, we can go get her now, but Berkeley is like, no, I'm not going anywhere near that mole. You've seen what he's done to bugs, like in the original film. But Toad is determined for an extra pair of hands, so he keeps Berkeley around. Fieldmouse tells Thumbelina about the wedding proposition, where Thumbelina hard disagrees with this. She's like, no, excuse me, what? But then Mrs. Fieldmouse gets her banger of a song, Marry the Mole, with a girly pop rendition, because I'm in love with Chapel Rowan. The song very much comes across as her having a crush on Mr. Mole, but it serves to convince / manipulate Thumbelina into agreeing with the marriage. I've strictly written Fieldmouse this way because I wanted more in-depth characters, as said prior, where they are inherently bad or good serving to the main character, just depending on which way you're looking at it. Because Fieldmouse is keeping Thumbelina alive, but is also manipulating her into getting married. Basically with blackmail, going like, hey Thumbelina, if you don't marry the mole, I'll throw you out into the winter, and we know you can't survive that. At night, Thumbelina sneaks back to Giacomo with a blanket and pulls out the thorn in his wing. She waits for him to wake, but he doesn't, because he's dead. So she stares at the pin, the Chekhov's pin and button, and talks about maybe marrying the mole to survive the winter, and then running away in spring. Because she doesn't want to get kicked out and die of hypothermia. Giacomo doesn't awaken by her hoping, so she cries and goes back to wherever she was asleep, taking some things with her. The wedding reception is on, with Fieldmouse prepping Thumbelina. Thumbelina asks why Fieldmouse is doing this, but Mouse is like, I want what's best for my mole. If this makes him happy, I'm happy. Thumbelina is heavily refusing, but once threatened with being thrown out again, she takes her chances to escape on the aisle. So a sober rendition of Marry the Mole plays, where Thumbelina hides a not-so-subtle needle in her bouquet and a not-so-subtle button on the back of her dress. Down the aisle, Mr. Mole says, "I do," but then Thumbelina says, "No, no thank you," even shouting it, that saying she will not marry him and she doesn't need his help if it's harming her. Boom! Crash! Grundle jumps in, ready to attack Thumbelina, but she pulls her sword, needle, and shield button on him, spooking everyone who thought she was just weak because she can't fly or something. She attacks the beetle, the toad, the mole, field mouse, priest, cabaret of beetles, everyone who was there. She runs down the hole Giacomo fell down, climbs up, and crushes everyone with a pile of Mr. Mole's knickknacks, like in the movie. She escapes the hole, climbs the hill to the tree, refusing all efforts from everything in her way. Snow, brambles, beetles, be damned. She gets to the fairy tree, and with a moment, we think she's too late, because they've boarded up the tree for the winter, and she sees no entrance. But a door from under the root opens, where a fairy comes out and invites Thumbelina in. She goes into the tree of fairies, finally excited to be there, but looks around where all their perceived major points of meetups, like shops and homes and community gardens, are only accessed by flying. She's devastated. Thumbelina apologizes for intruding and begrudgingly asks if they can just fly her home. However, surprise! There's wingless fairies in the society who are far more than capable of coexisting with the winged ones, because fairy progression. They've made everything accessible to themselves through innovation, where Thumbelina fits right in with her forward thinking. Kind of like Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell was an inventor, Thumbelina's an innovator. In the spring, Mama is sitting in the garden, where she hears bees and dragonflies coming through, with Thumbelina at the helm. She apologizes for ever doubting her mother. The mother apologizes for never letting Thumbelina explore. Thumbelina lives happily with the fairies, visiting her mother. That's essentially the film, because Thumbelina is a working woman innovator with no wings. She doesn't get wings. That's the whole point. She's disabled, and she can still do stuff. Ah! The purpose of this reboot is to portray Thumbelina as not a weak, weeping girl, but instead as someone who is still soft and kind, but can stand up for herself when needed, regardless of abilities or lack of, and she is in fact very resourceful. Because compared to Bluth's adaptation, Hans actually had her do stuff. She lassoed the dragonfly, she knew her direction, she understood where she was going, she healed, she didn't just pull out the thing for Giacomo, she cleaned up his wound, she healed him. She helped, she did stuff, instead of sitting there and weeping the entire time and letting the plot happen to her, and then just getting wings. Moreover, Thumbelina is definitely written as disabled, like her mum. Both of them have disabilities. Thumbelina is disabled because she doesn't have wings, whatever, and her mum is in a wheelchair. As well as this, the purpose is to terminate Bluth's sexism, racism, and all over shoddy red storytelling. Because the story should be much more than a heteronormative ending. Because what were you meant to get from the original film? I don't know. You were to fall in love with one guy and marry him and be determined to marry him because love exists. But sometimes love doesn't exist and doesn't need to exist. People can be so much more than these Disney romances. And I feel we need more stories without love interests. But this is just my personal bias as being biased in general. Conclusion as a storyteller. How can I ensure my artistic practice is inclusive of a diverse range of viewpoints and fair representation of people? Here's the thing. I can't, solely as myself. I am writing Thumbelina from my own experiences as someone who is disabled and who has gone through the world where people are telling me I can't do stuff and I should learn to let people do it for me. That is where I'm writing Thumbelina from. However, characters, notably like the toads, are experiences I can't write from. I can write about them, but it's not driven by any personal trail. That is why if given any chance to reboot it, I would take action to employ people who can write from these experiences and know about them, to share their stories, to then implement progressive and diverse storytelling, and realistic storytelling as well, but it being anthropomorphic animals and fairies. But I digress! I think the best way as a creator to make sure something is a diverse range of viewpoints and fair representation of people is to consult the viewpoints that you're wanting. I know that I can certainly write about disabled characters, and so I will, and I will continue to do that, as well as feminist characters and characters who don't strive for any romantic appeal or any heteronormative endings. I know from my experience and my deconstruction of those, I can write about them. And so for further storytelling, if I were to write about something that I'm not familiar with, I would seek out those people and get their influence and impact and get them to tell me about what I am missing, what I don't see, what I'm not privy to then write accurate stories. Because I've rewritten the Toads to the best capability as my further understanding. I think that's all I need. You just need open mind when creating to be able to do diverse range points and not be a white man. Sorry, that is. All in all, in conclusion, I don't like Don Bluth anymore. Or Jacquimo. Jacquimo sucks.